The FBI, recognized as one of the world's most advanced law enforcement agencies, is often called upon to confront the most dangerous and complex criminal cases. When an entire family suddenly vanished along the Oregon coast, disbelief and panic spread through the small community. "This can't be happening to us," one resident recalled thinking. The Bureau quickly mobilized, determined to uncover what had happened. Investigators went door to door, showing photographs and asking questions, yet no one seemed to know the missing family. There was no history, no background information, and no apparent connection to the local area. The sense of confusion and dread deepened with every unanswered question. It was a cold morning in the quiet coastal town of Waldport, Oregon, when a lone man taking a walk on the beach spotted something unusual drifting in the shallow surf. Alarmed, he contacted 911, and the call was routed to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office in Newport, about 18 miles away. Detectives Dennis Bossy and Trish Miller were the first to arrive at the scene. "I responded to the Waldport area, down at Alcia Bay," Bossy later recalled. "Detective Miller met me there. What they discovered left them shaken. A small boy's body, dressed only in underwear, lay on the sand. The child appeared young, perhaps 3 or 4 years old. Despite the tragic scene, what stood out to the detectives was how carefully groomed he was, his hair neat, his fingernails and toenails trimmed. At first glance, there were no visible signs of violence. Authorities couldn't immediately determine if foul play was involved. "You couldn't see that he'd been hurt in any way," one of the detectives noted, a haunting observation that would only deepen the mystery surrounding the case. The cause of death was not immediately clear. At first, investigators assumed the boy might have drowned. "We thought maybe within an hour or two, some frantic parent would come running to tell us their child was missing," one detective explained. But hours passed, and no one came forward. No reports of a missing child were filed anywhere in the area. The situation grew increasingly unsettling. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident began to look far more mysterious. Detectives started to wonder if they were dealing with something darker than an accidental drowning. The unexplained death prompted the activation of the local major crimes team, a collaboration between local, state, and federal authorities. Among those called to assist were the specialists most experienced in handling complex and sensitive cases, the FBI. "We're always alert to missing child reports," said Special Agent Mike Hullman, a 17-year veteran of the Bureau. "I contacted the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office to offer our help. Hullman's experience told him the case could swing either way. It might have been a simple accident, or it could have involved something far more sinister, possibly even an abduction." As is standard for the FBI, their involvement began immediately and would continue until every lead was exhausted. Hullman and his team's first goal was to identify the little boy. Without a name, they had no way to uncover how or why he had died. "We had nothing," Hullman recalled. "We set up a command post and started knocking on every door in town. We asked if anyone had relatives visiting with a young boy, showed photographs, and asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual the night before. Investigators explored every possible theory, including the idea that the child might have been involved in a freak car accident. But as time passed and no explanations surfaced, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. It was the beginning of a disturbing mystery that would soon draw national attention. Investigators expanded their search, enlisting the help of the Coast Guard to patrol Yaquina Bay and nearby Forest Service roads. They hoped to find clues of a possible car accident. Perhaps a vehicle had veered off the road and into the water. "We didn't know if we were dealing with a family that had drowned somewhere along the waterways," one investigator explained. Despite their extensive efforts, the search yielded nothing. No wreckage, no additional bodies, just silence. With few leads and growing urgency, authorities decided to take the case public, hoping someone might recognize the child. "We released a photo to the media," a detective recalled. "It ran in the newspaper and was broadcast on local television. That decision changed everything." One evening, as the story aired, a woman named Denise Thompson was at her parents' home when the news report caught her eye. "Hey, Mom, come look at this," she called out. On the screen was an artist's sketch of the young boy. I was shocked it looked exactly like Zachary, she said. I knew that boy. Denise had been babysitting Zachary Longo, the 4-year-old son of Christian and Mary Jane Longo, just days earlier. She also cared for his younger sisters, Sadie and Madison. Realizing the horrifying possibility, she immediately picked up the phone. Our neighbor was the local sheriff, she explained. I called him and said, You know that case about the little boy found in the bay? I think I know who that is. Denise informed investigators that she worked with Christian Longo at a nearby coffee shop. She added that the Longo family had only recently moved to Newport about 6 weeks earlier. Acting quickly, police headed to the Longo's condominium, a comfortable, well-kept apartment overlooking the Newport coastline. When we arrived at their building, there was no one home, one officer recalled. The condo appeared neat and orderly, as if the family might walk through the door at any moment. But the eerie stillness inside told a different story, one that hinted at something deeply wrong. Investigators expanded their search, enlisting the help of the Coast Guard to patrol Yaquina Bay and nearby Forest Service roads. They hoped to find clues of a possible car accident. Perhaps a vehicle had veered off the road and into the water. We didn't know if we were dealing with a family that had drowned somewhere along the waterways, one investigator explained. Despite their extensive efforts, the search yielded nothing. No wreckage, no additional bodies, just silence. With few leads and growing urgency, authorities decided to take the case public, hoping someone might recognize the child. We released a photo to the media, a detective recalled. It ran in the newspaper and was broadcast on local television. That decision changed everything. One evening, as the story aired, a woman named Denise Thompson was at her parents' home when the news report caught her eye. Hey, Mom, come look at this, she called out. On the screen was an artist's sketch of the young boy. I was shocked it looked exactly like Zachary, she said. I knew that boy. Denise had been babysitting Zachary Longo, the 4-year-old son of Christian and Mary Jane Longo, just days earlier. She also cared for his younger sisters, Sadie and Madison. Realizing the horrifying possibility, she immediately picked up the phone. Our neighbor was the local sheriff, she explained. I called him and said, You know that case about the little boy found in the bay? I think I know who that is. Denise informed investigators that she worked with Christian Longo at a nearby coffee shop. She added that the Longo family had only recently moved to Newport about 6 weeks earlier. Acting quickly, police headed to the Longo's condominium, a comfortable, well-kept apartment overlooking the Newport coastline. When we arrived at their building, there was no one home, one officer recalled. The condo appeared neat and orderly, as if the family might walk through the door at any moment. But the eerie stillness inside told a different story, one that hinted at something deeply wrong. Inside the Longo family's condominium, nothing appeared out of place. As I recall, it was spotless, one investigator noted. It didn't look like anyone had left in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of violence, just an unnerving sense of normalcy. Detectives carefully searched the apartment, hoping to find anything that might reveal where the family had gone, but they came up empty-handed. Their immediate goal was to locate the parents and notify them of young Zachary's death. Yet there was one critical obstacle. No one in the community actually knew the Longos. When you're trying to find someone, you start with friends and family, an officer explained. But we quickly realized they didn't have any close connections in Lincoln County. They'd only been here a short time. With no local leads, the FBI broadened the investigation nationwide. We sent out alerts to all our field offices. Special Agent Mike Holman said, We asked them to contact anyone who might know the Longos' friends, relatives, co-workers. We needed to find out if they had phones, if anyone had heard from them, anything at all. While the search intensified, Denise Thompson remained the only person able to identify Zachary. Investigators asked her to come in the next morning to confirm the boy's identity. Meanwhile, a police dive team returned to the bay, combing the waters near where Zachary's body had been found. They were hoping to find evidence, perhaps a clue, that explained how he had ended up there. What they uncovered, however, was far more horrifying than anyone expected. The divers went down looking for information about Zachary Longo, one detective later recalled, but what they found stunned everyone. Beneath the surface, entangled in the murky water, was a sleeping bag. Inside it was the body of another small child, a toddler girl. Like Zachary, she was dressed only in her underwear. A pillowcase filled with rocks had been tied around her ankle, weighing her down. The grim discovery shattered any lingering hope that the first death had been accidental. It was now clear that something far more sinister was unfolding on the Oregon coast. That was the moment investigators knew, without question, they were dealing with a homicide. The second child pulled from the water was believed to be 3-year-old Sadie Longo, Zachary's younger sister. "We were fairly certain they were siblings," one detective said quietly. "They looked alike, just a few years apart in age." The dive team continued their grim search, determined to uncover more evidence. Soon, they discovered another sleeping bag and a second pillowcase filled with rocks. The finding offered a chilling revelation. This was likely the same method used to drown Zachary. "Once we found that second pillowcase," an investigator recalled, "we assumed Zachary had been weighed down in the same way. He was deliberately drowned." Even for veteran detectives, the scene was almost unbearable. The brutality of the crime struck deeply. "It was horrific, something I never want to witness again," one officer said. "In all my years as an investigator, I've always been able to separate myself emotionally from the work. But this time, I couldn't. I broke down and cried." The reality was inescapable. The Longo children had been murdered. But the pressing questions remained. Why? And by whom? Who could commit such an unthinkable act against 2 innocent children? The fact that no one in the community really knew the Longo family made the mystery even more perplexing. Investigators were left to wonder whether they were dealing with a family tragedy or the actions of a disturbed outsider. Meanwhile, the rest of the Longo family, Mary Jane, and the remaining children were still missing. The uncertainty created a growing sense of dread throughout Newport. With a potential child killer on the loose, time was critical. "Were Zachary and Sadie the only victims?" one detective asked. "Or was this just the beginning?" No one had the answer. 3 days had passed since the bodies of Zachary and Sadie Longo were found floating off the Oregon coast. Their discovery painted a horrifying picture. 2 small children discarded like trash, their bodies weighted down to ensure they would never surface. Whoever did this had done it deliberately and with chilling intent. The FBI and local sheriff's department were now working around the clock. But a troubling uncertainty loomed over every lead. They didn't know whether the Longo children had been killed by someone close to them or by a predator stalking the quiet town of Newport. Fear gripped the community. "My husband's a big guy," one local woman said. "But even he kept a shotgun by the bed at night. You just didn't know who might be next." The sense of unease spread quickly. If someone was randomly murdering families, anyone could be a target. Meanwhile, the rest of the Longo family, Mother Mary Jane, Father Christian, and their youngest child, Madison, were still missing. Investigators were haunted by the question, were they victims too, or had something else happened? "We had 2 children dead," one detective recalled. The obvious question was, where's the rest of the family? With limited physical evidence, the crime team turned to the public for help. They released information through the media, urging anyone who might have seen something unusual to come forward. The community responded. "Tips started pouring in," said one investigator. "Dozens of people called, each with something they thought might be important. We had to chase down every single lead." One caller reported seeing a suspicious vehicle parked near a local playground, a car that seemed to be watching children. Detectives followed up immediately, but the mysterious vehicle was gone by the time they arrived. "This is a small town," an officer explained. "Strange cars, unfamiliar faces, they stand out, and people notice." Another caller described an unsettling encounter from the night before Zachary's body surfaced. The witness said he had stopped on a nearby bridge to check on a man who appeared to have car trouble. "He saw the vehicle's parking lights on," the report read, "and thought the driver might need help." It was a seemingly ordinary detail, but in a case this dark and uncertain, Even the smallest clue could lead investigators closer to the truth about what had happened to the Longo family. The witness who had stopped on the bridge tried to make sense of the encounter. "Everything all right, man?" he asked. The man in the car explained that a warning light had come on, and he was just waiting it out. When offered help, he waved it off. The witness thought it was odd, but hadn't been able to note the make of the car or its license plate. He could only give police a vague description of the man. With limited leads, investigators turned their attention back to the man who had originally found Zachary's body. "Whoever discovers a body first is always someone of interest," an officer explained. "People often try to involve themselves in cases. Sometimes they turn out to be the suspect." After bringing him in for more thorough questioning, troubling details emerged. The man had a history of violence against children, raising immediate concerns. He claimed that the previous night he had attended an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Police checked the building where the meeting had been held and conducted a luminol test in the restroom, hoping for clues. The results were shocking. "When we sprayed the bathroom, we found blood on the walls," an investigator said. "It made us suspicious. We thought he might have taken the child and killed him there." Blood samples were collected and sent to the lab for analysis, but without further evidence, authorities could not make an arrest. While the investigation appeared to be making progress, one critical question remained unanswered: the whereabouts of the rest of the Longo family. To locate them, the FBI launched a comprehensive background search on the parents. "Every adult leaves a trail," Special Agent Holman explained. "From rental cars and plane tickets to credit card records, every interaction provides clues. We had to follow that trail to see who last heard from them and where they might be now." Through their investigation, agents began piecing together the life of Mary Jane Baker, Zachary's mother. Born in 1,967 inches, Ann Arbor, Michigan, she was one of 6 children, a small detail that could soon help unravel the larger mystery of the Longo family's disappearance. Mary Jane Baker's early life was shaped by a strict upbringing. Her parents divorced in the 1972nd, and, according to her brother Mark Baker, their mother raised all 6 children as Jehovah's Witnesses. "My mom got into the truth when I was about 7, Mark recalled. "So Mary Jane was probably around 4. That was basically her life. We were raised very strict." Mary Jane met Christian Longo in her mid-20s while working as a secretary. Though Christian was only 17 at the time, they shared much in common. Both had divorced parents and a deep connection to their faith. "He was like anyone else, normal-looking, actually better looking than some," a family acquaintance said. "He had good manners, didn't party, and was very respectful." Christian became Mary Jane's first love. She had not dated anyone before meeting him. The couple married in the spring of 1993. Mary Jane devoted herself entirely to family life, with her sole ambition being to be a loving wife and mother. They quickly started a family. Zachary was born in February 1997, followed by Sadie and Madison. By all accounts, Mary Jane was a devoted and attentive mother. The children were well cared for, rarely cried, and always appeared happy and neatly dressed. Christian pursued entrepreneurship, starting a company that cleaned construction sites. The business initially flourished, allowing him to provide for the family, while Mary Jane stayed home to care for the children. "It seemed like a perfect little family," an observer noted. 3 cute kids, a clean, tidy household, and Mary Jane was a wonderful mother. But the family's stability didn't last. Christian's business eventually collapsed when several clients failed to pay, leaving him unable to meet payroll. Burdened by debt and embarrassed by his financial struggles, he decided to move the family west in September 2001, hoping for a fresh start. He felt he had to be the sole provider, an acquaintance explained. "Maybe the pressure was too much, so he took the family to make a new beginning." The Longos set out for a new life, carrying with them the hope of rebuilding the dream they had once had. The Longos set out to start fresh, eventually landing in Newport, Oregon. Christian secured an apartment overlooking the ocean and took a job at a local coffee shop to support the family. His idea of a romantic gift? Denise Thompson, A coworker who would become close to the family recalled. He bought me a vacuum cleaner because it would help around the house. It was at the coffee shop that Denise met Christian. They quickly became friends. He was fun to work with, always smiling, happy, a young family man with 3 little kids. It was great having a new friend at work, she said. Denise, aware that the Longos didn't know anyone in Oregon, wanted to help them feel welcome. We're a tight-knit community down here, she explained. I knew it was rough for them being so new, so I wanted to make them feel at home. Denise offered to babysit for the young couple so they could have a night out. I said, let's be friends. I'll watch your kids, and you can watch mine sometime. It sounded like fun, she remembered. Christian and Mary Jane happily accepted, heading out for dinner and a movie, leaving their children in Denise's care. The 2 oldest, Zachary and Sadie, were remarkably easygoing. Extremely friendly little kids, Denise said. They were the easiest kids to watch. Not a thing wrong with them. They were polite, happy, and just delightful. In that small moment of everyday life, the family seemed like any other. A young couple navigating parenthood with 3 well-behaved children in a new town, hoping to build a life full of simple joys. The Longo children had seemed happy and well cared for, bright, loving kids with a stable home life. Denise Thompson, who had grown close to the family, was devastated. They were great kids, she said softly. I'd fallen in love with that little family. I just wanted to be friends with them so badly. I can't imagine why anyone would hurt those children. Federal agents shared her disbelief, but were now forced to confront difficult questions. Was the Longo family in deeper trouble than anyone had realized? Could they have been running from someone, perhaps a creditor or a person with a grudge? There were a lot of possible scenarios, one investigator explained, but none of them could justify what happened to those kids. The questions grew darker. Who could have so coldly murdered 2 innocent children? And what about the rest of the Longo family, Mary Jane and the youngest child, Madison? Were they being held somewhere against their will, or had they met the same fate? We didn't know what we were dealing with, an agent admitted. We didn't know if someone had killed the entire family. By this point, 8 days had passed since anyone had seen Christian, Mary Jane, or Madison Longo. The bodies of Zachary and Sadie had been recovered near a bridge outside Newport, but the rest of the family remained missing. Our biggest priority was finding Mary Jane and Madison, one investigator said. We didn't even think in terms of alive or dead, we just wanted to find them. The investigation pressed forward, but leads were scarce. The only person of interest remained the man who had discovered Zachary's body. His criminal history, which included past offenses against children and the blood found in a nearby restroom, made him seem like a strong suspect. However, when police administered a lie detector test, he passed. It was a breakthrough, but not the kind the investigators had hoped for. The man who had seemed like their best lead was now likely innocent, and the real killer of the Longo children was still out there. I was one of the investigators who interviewed the man initially considered a suspect. During the interview, he made statements that were completely against his own interest, I recalled. I knew he was telling the truth. Meanwhile, forensic analysis revealed that the blood found in the AA bathroom did not belong to Zachary. Instead, it came from various people who had attended meetings and, as investigators later learned, frequently used that restroom to inject drugs. It was actually common to find blood there, one agent explained. With that lead disproven, the search for the killer returned to square one. Determined to find the Longos, agents intensified their efforts, retracing the family's every move. We had our FBI analysts here in Oregon running every background check we could, one investigator said. Information remained sparse until a tip arrived from a local hotel where the Longos had stayed during their first days in Newport. A housekeeper had discovered a family album along with fingerprints, footprints, and birth certificates. Among the items was Mary Jane's driver's license. It was darkly ominous, an agent admitted. Photo albums, children's belongings, no mother would throw away these things. Mary Jane certainly wouldn't discard her ID either. Filled with a sense of dread, authorities sent divers into the waters near the Longo's condominium. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. Beneath the docks, the divers found 2 suitcases. One of the cases had hair protruding from the zipper. I asked the divers to bring the suitcases up to the dock, an investigator said. That's when we made the horrific discovery Mary Jane was in one suitcase and Madison in the other. I broke down, I cried. Both mother and child had been strangled and tightly folded into the suitcases. Mary Jane had been stripped of all her clothes. The scene was a chilling confirmation. The Longo family's nightmare was far from over, and the perpetrator had acted with calculated cruelty. Police were stunned by the sheer brutality of the crime, particularly considering Mary Jane's modest, religious nature. It was so egregious, one investigator said, shaking his head. To stuff her naked into a suitcase, knowing that anyone who found her would see her like that bothered me more than anything. The Longo family was devastated. It just breaks your heart, a relative said quietly. You'll never get over something like this. But even as grief consumed them, investigators knew they had to focus on the facts. There was no justification for what had been done. One question loomed over the investigation. Where was Christian Longo? Authorities faced grim possibilities. Would his body soon wash up along the Oregon coast, like his wife and youngest child? Or had this seemingly devoted father committed the unthinkable, murdering his entire family and fleeing the state? In an effort to answer these questions, police again interviewed Denise Thompson, the last known person to see the Longo children alive. During the interview, Denise recalled a detail that had seemed trivial at first, but now took on ominous significance. She remembered the night she had babysat the Longo children just days before Zachary's death. Christian and Mary Jane had returned from a date, and Christian had appeared unusually distraught. He seemed troubled, worried about something. Denise recalled. What had caused the father's sudden agitation? At that moment, investigators realized that even the smallest observations could hold a key to understanding the horrifying chain of events that had engulfed the Longo family. It was late around 11 p.m. when Denise Thompson noticed something unusual about Christian Longo. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. A few days later, at work, he approached her with unexpected news. Denise, he said, I have something to tell you. I wanted you to hear it from me first. My wife is leaving me. She took the kids and left. Denise was stunned. Are you okay? She asked. That was the last time she saw Christian in person. When she went to pick up her paycheck a few days later, he wasn't at work even though he had been scheduled. I went in to say hi, and his manager told me he hadn't shown up, Denise recalled. I was instantly concerned. I thought, what if he had done the worst, hurt himself? Agents were alarmed by this new information. Could Christian have killed his wife and children in a fit of rage before taking his own life? The possibility shocked those who knew him. Friends and co-workers were outraged at the suggestion. My fellow employees were furious, one colleague said. Who would finger Christian? Who would believe he could do such a thing? He wasn't a murderer. Meanwhile, the FBI and Newport police were racing against time to locate Christian Longo. He was the only member of the family whose whereabouts were unknown. More than a week had passed without any sign of him, and concern for his safety grew. My husband and I drove by the landing to see if his Durango was there, a neighbor recounted. It wasn't in the garage underneath, and it wasn't in the parking lot either. The mystery of Christian Longo's disappearance only deepened, leaving investigators and the community on edge. Denise tried to reassure herself. I thought, well, he could be anywhere now. All I can do is be concerned for his well-being, she said. But investigators feared that Christian's disappearance wasn't simply a matter of personal retreat or distress. The possibilities were darker and terrifying. You're only limited by your imagination in a scenario like this, one agent noted. Maybe the father killed his wife, killed the kids, and then killed himself. Their suspicions deepened as they dug into Christian Longo's past. On the surface, he had a seemingly normal upbringing, but his history revealed a pattern of deception. Even his parents, devoutly religious people, admitted he exhibited personality disorders. He had a long record of lying and manipulating others, and had defrauded his own family of significant sums of money. It was a lifelong pattern, an investigator said. He was a liar, a thief, and a very charming manipulator. Agents discovered that Christian's troubles had begun long before moving to Oregon. When his construction business in Michigan started to fail, he began writing checks to himself from the company account to maintain appearances. They were driving brand new cars, living the high life, a coworker recalled. I couldn't understand it. My wife and I both work full-time. I almost worked 2 jobs, and we could barely afford 1 new car. Further investigation revealed additional financial fraud. Christian had bounced checks to employees and forged documents to cover his tracks. Nothing added up, an agent said. It became clear that this was a man who had spent his entire life deceiving people. And now we had to wonder if that deception had escalated to something far more dangerous. Christian Longo's financial troubles had caught up with him, and he went to great lengths to maintain the appearance of success. He wanted people to think he was a big man, but he couldn't afford it. They were deeply in debt, an investigator explained. His deception came to a head at a bank. While cashing a check, the teller grew suspicious and asked for his ID. Realizing he was being scrutinized, Christian panicked, fled the bank, and left his identification behind. The law caught up with him. Police arrested Christian for writing bad checks, and his secret life was exposed. He was given probation, but the repercussions went beyond the legal system. His actions brought shame upon the family's Jehovah's Witness church. We can't have this type of behavior in our religion, a church member explained. Mary Jane was forced to endure the social fallout. It affects her because she can't hang around with the same people. They shun you like you're a bad person, she later said. Christian's schemes continued. He moved the family to a dilapidated warehouse in Ohio, planning to convert it into living space. He also stole construction equipment and attempted to resell it, but a prospective buyer sensed something was wrong and reported him to the authorities. At one point, he was caught with $20,000 worth of stolen property. When detectives returned to the office with warrants, Christian had vanished within hours. Sensing the news tightening, his flight instincts kicked in. Without giving his family time to process or pack, Christian uprooted them entirely, dragging them west and leaving behind the life and community they had known. His pattern of deception, manipulation, and avoidance had escalated into a desperate bid to escape consequences, setting the stage for the dark events that would later unfold in Oregon. When investigators finally looked inside the Longo's Ohio home, they were struck by what had been left behind. There were so many family items still there, one agent said. Mary Jane's clothes, her wedding dress, even her Bible. All their photo albums, her graduation diploma. Things you just don't leave behind. These are cherished possessions. The discovery highlighted a troubling pattern. Christian had removed Mary Jane from everything familiar, isolating her from family and community. She lost contact with her family and virtually disappeared, an investigator explained. She had to depend on Chris for everything. She was really trapped there. It was almost like a domestic violence situation. Mary Jane's relatives grew worried and contacted authorities once they realized she and the children were missing in Ohio. We filed missing persons reports with the Toledo police for Mary Jane and the kids because we knew something was wrong, a family member said. But the reports were later canceled after the family received a postcard from Mary Jane, mailed from South Dakota. The note read in part, "We're okay. Chris is looking for work. I'll call when we're settled." The postcard offered a brief reprieve, but it did little to erase growing concerns. Investigators now understood that Christian Longo was not the man they had believed him to be, a charming, devoted father. Instead, he was a manipulator with a long history of deceit. And yet the question remained, was he dead? Or was he once again on the run, eluding authorities? Everything changed when investigators received a surprising call from Christian Longo's former employer. He was alive and, astonishingly, had just applied for a job at a Starbucks in San Francisco. Using the manager's name on the application and enlisting help from several friends in Lincoln County, Christian inadvertently revealed his location. "We all knew who we were chasing at that point," an FBI agent recalled. Authorities couldn't believe how carelessly he had exposed his whereabouts. The San Francisco office immediately sprang into action, setting up a stakeout at the Starbucks in hopes that he would return. But Christian never showed. The fugitive was moving too quickly and too cleverly to be caught so easily. He used a stolen credit card to make purchases and book travel, leaving a trail that investigators tracked. He purchased a plane ticket from San Francisco to Texas, and then from Texas to Cancun, Mexico, heading south of the border to evade capture. Unknown to him, Special Agent Dan Clay was stationed in Mexico specifically to monitor fugitives like Christian. At the time, in the early 2000s, Americans did not need a passport to enter Mexico, making it a common destination for those trying to disappear. As the search intensified, Christian Longo was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Flyers with his photo and details of his crimes were distributed throughout Cancun and surrounding areas in the hope that someone would recognize him and provide a tip. By the 14th of January 2002, the suspected murderer was officially reported to have fled to Cancun, Mexico, following the discovery of the bodies of his wife and 3 children in Newport, Oregon. The manhunt was now international, and the clock was ticking to bring Christian Longo to justice. The FBI officially placed Christian Longo on its 10 Most Wanted list and blanketed Cancun with flyers bearing his face. Agents knew that American fugitives abroad often sought some form of connection to home, and they focused their attention on places where tourists and expatriates gathered. "If you're an American, you tend to look for familiar comforts," one agent explained. Internet cafes, public transportation hubs, taxi stands, and bus depots were the logical places to start. Their instincts proved right. Within 48 hours, a promising lead surfaced. A local tour guide reported that he had recently shown a man matching Longo's description around the area and had dropped him off at a remote campground about 50 miles from Cancun. Acting swiftly but discreetly, agents surrounded the campground. Inside a small cabana, they spotted the fugitive relaxed, confident, and apparently enjoying his new life. Longo was not hiding in fear or remorse. Instead, he was living under an alias, entangled in a romantic relationship with a young German woman, a freelance photographer who believed he was a journalist on assignment. "He didn't seem to be grieving at all," one investigator later said. "He looked like a man who had left his old life behind." As the sun dipped low over the Mexican coast, agents moved in. Working with local authorities, the Mexican police approached the cabana, burst inside, and pulled the man from his chair. "Who are you guys?" he demanded, struggling as the officers restrained him. "I identified myself as FBI," one agent recalled. "He said his name was Michael." The agent held up a flyer. "Christian Michael Longo, right?" After a brief silence, Longo glanced at the paper, saw his own face staring back, and quietly admitted, "Yes, the international manhunt was over. The fugitive who had murdered his family and fled across borders had finally been caught. Christian Longo was finally arrested without incident, and FBI Special Agent Dan Clay confronted him immediately. Longo was given a stark choice: voluntarily return to the United States or face a protracted fight against extradition from a Mexican jail. I looked at him and said, "You choose. It's your choice," Clay recalled. Terrified of being trapped in a Mexican prison, Longo quickly agreed to return to the U.S. Back on American soil, with limited hard evidence linking Longo directly to the murders, Special Agent Clay needed a confession. He began questioning Longo the moment the plane took off. "The purpose of my conversation was to get him to admit and tell the story of what happened to his wife and kids," Clay said. Longo, however, was evasive, cloaking his answers in religious overtones. He spoke about his beliefs, explaining that after death, people go to sleep. When asked if that's where his family was, Longo calmly replied, "Yes, they're in a state of sleep." When pressed for a reason, he said, "I wanted them to be in a better place." It was as close as he came to admitting anything. In February 2003, just 1 month before his capital murder trial, Longo shocked authorities by pleading guilty to the murders of his wife, Mary Jane, and their youngest daughter, Madison. He refused to explain how or why he had killed them, and continued to maintain that he had not killed Zachary and Sadi. Whether this was a legal tactic to avoid the death penalty or another strategy was unclear, but to investigators, it was largely meaningless, a smokescreen in an otherwise brutal case. The highly publicized trial began on the 10th of March 2003. Mary Jane's family braced for what was to come, unsure what to expect. There was never a 100% feeling that he was going to be convicted. One family member admitted, knowing the courtroom drama would be both emotionally wrenching and legally complex. Investigators had long feared that Christian Longo might escape justice, not because the evidence was weak, but because of his skill as a manipulative con artist. When Longo took the stand during his trial, he spun an elaborate story, claiming he had returned home to find Zachary and Sadi dead, allegedly at the hands of Mary Jane. According to him, Mary Jane had come home in a rage, killed the two older children, and placed them in the water. He then claimed he strangled his wife out of anger and that baby Madison was struggling for her last breath, so he finished the job. In court, Longo attempted to smear Mary Jane's name, portraying her as the murderer in front of the jury and the world. His arrogance was palpable. He spent nearly 3 hours on the stand, clearly convinced he could manipulate the jury and convince them the prosecution had it all wrong. But the jury was not fooled. They saw through his lies and convicted Longo on 4 counts of aggravated murder, ensuring that Mary Jane and the children received the justice they deserved. Yes, an investigator recalled. He didn't walk away. That was the relief. Just 1 week later, Longo was sentenced to death. Standing before the court to make a statement, he said, "This is a wake-up call for me." For those who had followed the case, the words reflected the cold, self-centered mentality of a man who had lied, manipulated, and destroyed lives, all for his own gain. As one agent summed it up, "Lincoln, he's just a liar and a conniver, always out for number one." In a later jailhouse interview, Christian Longo admitted the chilling truth. He had deliberately killed his entire family because he was financially ruined and did not want them to witness his failure. He revealed to the journalist that he decided to kill Mary Jane just hours after they had been intimate, seeing it as the perfect opportunity. He strangled her, then placed her body in a suitcase. He did the same to Madison, packing her into a suitcase with clothing and a diving weight. Longo transported the suitcases to the docks and dumped them into the water. He then returned to his condo, gathered Zachary and Sadi, and drove them to Walport. At the Lintlew Bridge, he stopped his van and threw the children into the water. Moments later, he encountered a Good Samaritan who thought he was experiencing car trouble. Calmly, he explained, "Some sort of light came on in my car, and I'm just waiting it out," and then continued on, eventually returning home to attend a Christmas party, as if nothing had happened. Christian Longo now awaits execution on death row. In early 2011, he attempted to draw attention once again by offering to become an organ donor, claiming it would be penance for his crimes. He proposed to waive his appeals and accept the death penalty on the condition that he could donate his organs to science. Authorities and observers were outraged. "He's still trying to be in the limelight, still trying to justify it," one official said. "There isn't any justification. He shouldn't even be allowed to speak publicly, access the internet, or be around the public at all." Oregon officials ultimately denied his request, leaving Longo to face the full weight of justice for his heinous acts.